And I think one of the most memorable teach-ins that we had was at La Concha in Boyle Heights with some of our comrades that are here on the phone. Jojo's here with us right now. And the community, we did kind of like an activity around what does data mean and what is the definition of data. And in the end, people saw that data was just an extractive, violent kind of tactic where your story was then broken down into multiple data points and who you were and the context of where you were and why you got there and what your story was completely evaporated. And terms like I choose relationship over automation became a hashtag. Don't datify me became a hashtag. My data is not, or my story is not your data. And so the community, I think together, we started to realize the dangers of automation, the dangers of predictive analytics. And for me, being a nurse and very much everything that I do is about relationship, is about talking, is about context, is about knowing the intricacies of someone's life to be able to intervene and assist and help in growth and self-actualization. I saw this as being something completely dangerous. Now, when we shift into policing, it made sense as to why, CCTVs were up, why automatic license plate readers were there, why Stingray was there, because all these little components were all becoming part of the legitimization or the reason why LAPD would create this story to go after you. I think the hunt was very terrifying as well, learning about how these algorithms and risk assessments were being used to go after people, to legitimize harassing, especially very vulnerable folks who had just been released from prison, people trying to get freedom back from being in a cage, people who were just trying to live their lives again, breathe oxygen, and here they are on a list being tracked and traced in this assumption about who they are and why they are, where they're at that time, who they're hanging out with. All being broken down again into little numbers. And for me, yeah, that became one of the reasons why I became very, very passionate about needing to dismantle it all. Not just predictive policing, but looking at predictive analytics and wanting to completely step away and alarm the community that this was something that was going to be very dangerous for us, that was going to actually get in the way of us becoming human beings and becoming the true people that we should become. So, so in some ways, it was definitely about policing and definitely about exposing that, this was just a cover for racism and violence, but then realizing even bigger that predictive analytics and the datification of who we are was just a cover for capitalism, was a cover for white supremacy, was a cover for patriarchy. So yeah, so it's become like a new way of just seeing the world and seeing all the ways that it's impacting us. So, and it's been a tremendous journey with so many different people coming in and bringing light to a situation that needed to be exposed. And I really want to say that in those very first meetings, the community in Skid Row of LA Can were very, very clear about what this pseudoscience was. We're very clear about what predictive policing was. And I think that clarity really helped to propel the coalition into dismantling predictive policing.
Excellent. Thank you, Jamie. So let's go into that. I mean, I just, and I'm going to go to Craig. Craig, who is a comrade, a brother, Skid Row resident, has been organizing in Skid Row for 15 years. Really, just in those very earlier meetings, coined that term about pseudoscience, and it says that this is super fucked up. This is all pseudoscience. So Craig, talk about it. Like, just what was that about this fight, particularly that you really got very deeply involved with?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yeah. Greetings to everyone on the call. The pseudoscience of algorithms which can create predictive policing was immediately obvious to me, because we know that the programming put into a computer is what determines what the result coming out of the computer is. So I realized immediately that it was basically nothing more than a high-tech new version of racial profiling wrapped up in the pseudoscience of objectivity of a computer program, which is of course ridiculous. But my personal story a little bit is that I was and how I came into Stop LAPD Spying Coalition is that I'm a 16-year resident of Skid Row, and I came to Skid Row because of economic displacement. And, you know, I found myself on the row witnessing the profound suffering of homeless people. And while eventually getting subsidized Section 8 housing for myself, I became more and more angry about what I was seeing, and I started to get involved with a food and clothing and service providing nonprofit. But I didn't think I was doing enough, so I got even more involved by starting to hang around LACAN, the Los Angeles Community Action Network, and then eventually becoming an organizer at LACAN through our Human and Civil Rights Committee, and later joining our sister organization, the wonderful Stop LAPD Spying Coalition.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you. And I think this is what really, when we talk about a culture of resistance, I mean, like, you know, the reason we even name it as a culture of resistance is that, you know, what is our orientation and what is our journey? Because, you know, as strictly an abolitionist organization, we don't do any reform work. People have come back and people are like, you know, but for us, there is no gentler, kinder policing. There is no gentler, kinder state violence. There is no gentler, kinder racial profiling. It is violent, and it is the national security police state. But I think for that, I mean, there's this constant sort of building of that energy. And I want to go with somebody who I just has tremendous amount of respect for, Mr. Pancake, who is a Skid Row resident, and it's like, you know, who really would lead us into that full charge about, like, you know, what do you, so take with Pancake, like, you know, also as a Skid Row resident, also as an organizer, what was something about this piece and the energy that you brought to this fight?
Well, I'm just glad to be a part. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm just glad to be a part of the Stop LAPD Spying, a member, and also LACAN, you know. And what really moved me, you know, it's all about action, and it's about being, having influence in creating change, and it's a systemic thing. Stop LAPD Spying, you know, and, you know, I've had an experience with LAPD, the corrupt Rampart Division, when I was detained by a former cop whose name was Rafael Perez. And when I was kind of detained, my mouth, I said, what is really going on? I was pulled up from past experience, you know, and I said, oh, is this you? Look like you shined a flashlight in my face. I said, go to, okay, that's neither here nor there, but being a resident here, you know, I care about people, you guys. And, you know, holding LAPD accountable for their actions, you know, and really being there, visibly there, and having our tools, you know, for unjustified stops. We know about all of the officer-involved shooting. You can't kill Africa. And these police that are still working, some of them have gotten promotions, you know, but it's time to really expose the system. We know about the dirty divide. We know about broken windows, and we know about surveillance of police state. We're aware of that. And we want to blow it all. We want to blow. What do we say to data-driven policing?
Shut it down.
Shut it down.
Shut it down,
Shut it
man.
down.
It's about exposing the system for what it really is. Systemic racism, gentrification, going into areas where they get our young people freaked out. You know, by following close plate recognition, you know, and all of these taxes that they're using to bring about fear. You know,
Right.
we're talking about community policing. What is community policing? We were at City Hall and we weren't even invited. I said, what is this? You guys planned a meeting? Talking about community policing, and who's the community? It just rotates around you police? We say, hell no. So we're looking at our past actions, the fusion centers, you know, and, you know, all these actions that we've had been on the front line, you know, the drone-free LAPD, no drones LA, and how they would use their tactics as surveillance. And, you know, so much more I can say, but it's about doing our homework. I applaud Ahmed and Jamie and others for doing their homework, because it's fact, the reports that have been prepared and to speak truth to these powers that exist. I want to applaud y'all, and the fight continues. It's not time to stop right now. I don't want to take up too much time, but even in the midst of this COVID pandemic, you know, we cannot lose focus on this fight and what's really happening and where does it go from here? Where does it, after we come out of this, what do we continue to do? So that's just a few words that I had.
Thank you so much, Pancake, because I think that says it all. That's exactly the culture of resistance, that how do you maintain that continuity? But one thing, Pancake, you really raised, which is crucial to building campaigns, is in our fight, is doing our homework. That how do we substantiate, and what did that research look like? And we had some brilliant folks, you know, who just were absolutely burning the midnight oil and just all over the place. So I want to bring in my comrade, Tiff Guerra, and to talk about it, Tiff, like, you know, that burning that midnight oil, doing that research, just kind of throwing the truth and right there at their faces as they're sitting there, and then they're hoping that we would all die. So, talk about it, like, you know, what did it take? So, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ahmed, and it's great to join everyone here. Thank you so much, and for everyone sharing their experiences and information. Yeah, it was, you know, as I'm hearing people talk about like what it was that kind of gripped you in this campaign, and that's of course deeply significant, not only for getting us started in the campaign, but of course for keeping us going, because it was, you know, very much a long-lasting campaign. And even now, you know, it's something that while these programs have been shut down, there are certain elements that are going to continue and that, you know, are going to carry on. So the fight, of course, continues always. But yeah, the things that got me and that kind of speak to what you're saying are, I remember it was at the end of 2017, and I had been kind of contributing to the coalition's report on predictive policing that was going to be coming out that following April. And I had been listening to the focus group sessions and transcribing them and kind of quantifying the numbers on the community surveys that the coalition had done to get feedback and to hear people's experiences of what it feels like to live in these communities that are occupied by police and where folks are stopped by police all the time. What does that feel like? What does it feel like to see that happening in front of you all the time? And so I was kind of hearing that side of it. And then on the other side of it, kind of set against that, I was also reading these reports, you know, these research reports by Brantingham and others. And, you know, right at the very bottom in the footnotes or in the end notes, they say something about like how, you know, like 5 out of 7 of these authors are paid, like receive money for this program that they are saying miraculously works. And then like realizing, because I was kind of new to this scene, like realizing, wait, this is what they're saying. Like this is the proof of what this whole thing that they're implementing is, that they're like causing violence in communities. Like that's what's behind it. And just kind of seeing this sham of like lies and going to the police commission and hearing police sit there and outright lying about what was going on with these programs when we had documents specifically saying something that was completely different. And that just kind of like, it just kind of enraged me, and just like the injustice of it. And like I said, you know, then offsetting that against how folks are actually being impacted by these programs. And so that was kind of what made me realize at the end of 2017 that I had to dedicate my resources, my time, my energy to this fight, and that this was something that I was going to be spending a lot of time on and really committing all of my energy to.
Great. Thank you, thank you. So one piece of that that is directly related that you just mentioned, Tiff, was that, about the research. And for the coalition, one moving part that sometimes misses in our fight is mapping it out. Like, so what is the intellectual framework behind it? What is the thinking behind, these sort of programs, and how do they even conjure up some of these things? So, of course, predictive policing, Professor Jeffrey Brantingham, who is a professor of anthropology, co-created Predpol as a result. And for us, it was crucial that we need to take that fight back onto the campus. So I want to bring in Jeremy Levinson. Jeremy, go ahead and unmute yourself. I mean, just our comrade. And I don't even know, Jeremy, you study so many things that I forget that what all you're studying. And Jeremy, along with Peter, maybe on the call as well, Peter Pollock. Initially, I remember us meeting, at the LA Can office, and then going to campus and coming up with a whole plan that how do we expose the academic complicity, because academic complicity runs extremely deep. And so Jeremy which led to several things, and particularly one thing. Jeremy, why don't you talk about the stuff, and I'll come back on. I'm looking for that other document, but go ahead.
Yeah, it's so exciting to be with you all today, especially after the news from this past week, and I'm so grateful to be invited to speak with you all. So I've been working with a group of faculty and graduate students, primarily but not exclusively, in the UCLA anthropology department, in the same department with Jeffrey Brantingham, and I know there's a lot of students outside of our department that have a lot to say too. I know Peter's here, but I'll just say quickly from what happened in our department. As one of my advisors and comrades, Hannah Appel, says, we from back in, from when I arrived at UCLA 2017, 2016, we've been really students of Stop LAPD, students of Ahmed, Jamie, and all of the vision and organizing and also scholarship. And I think the work, the reports really helped make it clear that we in the anthropology department were structurally positioned in complicity with a very, kind of set of regimes that we wanted to be against. And it would be so, and would continue to be so unless we did something different. So, Stop LAPD, you all just made clear that the university, as it was existing, as we were, a part of it, was entangled and more than complicit with the regimes of policing, prisons, and other things. So the university you kind of grappled with was that a kind of terrain of ideological and political struggle. So what that meant for us is that we kind of, our commitment was to you all and to the coalition, and to actually realize that what we had to do is we had to get organized. And I mean, Stop LAPD, in the reports, all the intellectual work all had been done. It was, we've been students throughout, and so what it did take was organizing, and so that's what we did. And there was backlash that happened in the department, but what was really kind of amazing to see happen was, to go from a bunch of individual troublemakers, whether it's troublemaking students and faculty, to suddenly become, put faculty and other graduate students in a position where they had to answer to kind of which side are you on, because we had faculty from all over campus that signed the letters, and it wasn't hard to kind of get their support. It was people from law, gender studies, information studies, community health sciences, African American studies, history, English, social work, geography, ethnomusicology, all faculty from all over campus. And I remember those conversations well, Mohammed and Jamie, and I remember kind of thinking with you, kind of what's the goal, what's the end game, and what I remember is that you both had just such clarity to identify that Predpol was rotten to the core, and you kind of the insistence of a vision in which it had to be dismantled, and knowing that the struggle would be long, but that that had to be the vision throughout. And so it's, the last thing I'll just say, it's sobering, and to tell you, or just think about the fact that Brantingham continues to teach a course on campus, the anthropology of crime or something like that, which is one of the most popular courses on campus. But it gives me a lot of pleasure to think about, the reverberations of the ground that Stop LAPD shook and really shook will be felt in his classroom and his office when students come up to him and say, wait a minute, why should I be listening to you about this when, the community and ultimately LAPD even rejected your program. So I mean, I think it's really exciting to be here today after that victory, and it's been really great and an honor to be working with you all throughout.
Thank you, Jeremy. I mean, so I'm just sort of like scrolling through the letter, and it brings back memories, and it's just like amazing, like, just the range of folks that you and Hannah and everybody else reached out to, and how people immediately delivered. I mean, this is really a phenomenal process. But for us, it's also, I mean, we didn't stop there. I mean, I think this is where, like, what was the next step? So here I want to just bring in that as we were doing our research, we were also looking at the various targets as well. And a lot of times in the fights, and I think in this culture of resistance, sometimes we can also get tunnel visioned as well, that we look at a particular issue and we stay stuck on that. So, and the fight continues, but it's only through bringing in from multiple angles, bringing in various things, that we understand that what is this ecology that people are operating? Who are the players? Who's making the money? Who's justifying the use? Ultimately, why is the city so involved in this thing? Why is the police commission not taking any action? What about this development that is taking place? So I think which led to then our comrades from Free Rad support our work and come in and then help us sort of develop this, what we call the algorithmic ecology. So I'm gonna go to Sophie. Sophie, are you unmuted, right?
Yep.
Okay,
I'm
great.
good.
So Sophie, talk about it. Like, what was this that first of all attracted Free Rats to partner up and be in the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition mix, and then so let's talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. I think I definitely want to echo a lot of what folks have been saying already, especially Jamie and Craig, about this idea of the predictive policing and this rhetoric of objectivity is something that we're considering to be pseudoscience, but also connecting it to a larger history of science that has been harmful and violent, been used for different like colonial endeavors to segregate different communities and for just generally oppressive means. So I guess to give a little bit of background, so Free Radicals, we're an activist collective that's dedicated to creating a more socially just, equitable, and accountable science. And when you hear that, you might think like, oh, we're working within science to, make science better. But I think for us, a lot of it is also thinking about the times when science isn't the solution, or when science is being used as the rhetoric or being used as the language to give something false validity or legitimacy. And so for us, it's also about breaking down those systems that are using science, dismantling, not just, verbally breaking them down, but physically getting rid of them, and also making sure that they can't use this claim of objectivity as that point of legitimacy. And I think also on a larger level, a lot of, for us at Free Rads, it's thinking about how we fit into kind of this larger social change ecosystem, right? So we're a network of different folks. We have folks here in LA, we were started in LA, and then also on the East Coast and also remotely, but we don't have this kind of base. And so we're a network that really focuses on political education. So part of our framework is really centering the knowledge of folks who are directly impacted by issues that are relevant to our mission. And that's also at the core of what Stop LAPD Spying does. So we see our role kind of as supporting allies and accomplices through this political analysis, but also building these kinds of tools, doing this kind of very tangible work around science and technology, and then also working to make that critique accessible through popular education.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then one other thing, so I think what we were really excited to do with this is, and also one of the big things that we've learned from the coalition is this idea of not a moment in time, right? So that's something that's one of the, I think, four core tenets of Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, is that what we see now is a continuation of history, a continuation of the ways that policing has been violent, and how abolition really is the only way forward to create a healthy community for all of us. And I think for us, we were excited to also bring in this idea of not a moment in time in terms of science. So from the very beginning of there being a science, especially of there being only one specific legitimate form of Western science, there have been ways that science has been deployed to create harm. And so we were really grateful to be in the space with the coalition, to be learning from the folks in the coalition, the folks from LACAN, the folks on Skid Row, and to be contributing to the work. And also one cool note too with the algorithmic ecology, or actually I guess to talk a little bit about the algorithmic ecology, we were really thinking about what are the ways that the system of surveillance is part of a larger socio-technical system. So a lot of the times, as Jamie and I think Hamid had mentioned earlier with the Upturn report, it's just this idea of just this kind of feedback loop, but that really doesn't tell the whole picture. So what are the other folks who are involved in creating this larger algorithmic ecology? And I think it was, again, really great to learn from the coalition also about the whole architecture of surveillance, about the stalker state, and about how all of these different tools kind of really fit together. They're not things that they're things that are always in conversation with each other. And some of, I mentioned we have an East Coast chapter, some of our folks on the East Coast are actually using the algorithmic ecology to help them in a fight against some gang databases in Providence and New Haven. So
nice.
Hopefully, yeah, we can keep updated on how the work here is also spreading to other areas as well.
Nice, so. Nice. Thank you, Sophie. And I think for folks, just to give them a quick snapshot, so this is what it's like decentering the algorithm itself and looking at all the other players as to who has their interest in there. And we have a whole write-up on that on the algorithmic ecology. It's also posted on the website. It's on Medium, and hopefully very soon we should be releasing a tutorial video as well on what it really means, and so you can use. And just today, earlier, Sophie and myself were on a call, on a national call with a group of sex workers who are actually fighting back on some legislation that continues to criminalize sex work, into looking at what is that ecology of the abuse and the violence against sex workers that is coming on. We also, as the date was released, we centered that around bail reform and pretrial incarceration as well, and drew out that ecology. And it was really amazing to see that how it opens it up, almost what lurks beneath, and what it's almost like a power mapping on a different level. So thank you, Sophie. That was super helpful. So I think the plan was to kind of speak about this fight in part one, and then and immediately get down to work as to what the next phase of this is. But before we get there, just want to give chance to so Craig, let me just go to you. Where do you see this thing headed? I mean, how, what are we looking at? Because given COVID, that has thrown such a slant in there. So of course we stop for a second, we learn, and then we continue our fight. So talk briefly about that.
About the how this COVID situation influences the work.
Yeah, what is our call to action moving forward? Because this is throwing a whole lot of different wrench into our organizing as well.
Yeah, that's true, Hamid, and it's hard to predict from day to day what's going to happen next, because the situation with COVID-19 is such a fluid situation. But it makes me think of my personal view of the culture of resistance, and what that means to me personally is not to be taken over by fear. Mm-hmm. And one of the main things we have to do is continue to organize ourselves through collective action, but also collective learning about things like COVID-19 and pandemics that are going to be used now and in the future to try to suppress organizing and suppress the power of the people by making the government even less responsive to the ballot needs of the people and making it more and more of a surveillance situation. That's what's coming. That's what's coming next, and that's what we have to fight. As you pointed out so well in the zine.
Most definitely. No, absolutely. So what we'll do is, like, why don't we open it up and see if folks have any questions or comments for Jamie or Pancake or Tiff. Let's maybe, because we want to get back into our part 2, but let's take about 10 minutes. I'm gonna. Oops. Okay. If people can unmute, if people can mute themselves if they're not going to have a question or something. So, but if you do, please go ahead. Anybody, any questions?
I'd like to say something.
Please. Yes, go ahead.
I don't know if you can hear me really very quickly. Thank you for allowing me to participate. Congratulations on your victories, Mohammed, and all of the hard work that you and Jamie and Mariela and Nadia and all of your core members, of course, Pancake and Craig. This is Michelle, so I'm not going to speak forever. I just wanted to say from my own most recent experiences, experiencing incriminating, again with this, trying to instill or trying to exacerbate this fear tactic of dividing the people. Most recently, I've been attacked because I don't wear the mask or because I'm not, wearing the gloves. So I see that's a further means of separation and incrimination of people that are resisting. What I also think is that I'm glad that you told me about the dismantling of Predpol in terms of the mind control, in terms of the depopulation, which I think this is. I think that I'm so glad we are still finding creative means to stay connected in communication with each other, to support each other. Right. I know part of the prophecy. So I know with the New World Order that's coming, I believe that the shutdown is not going to lead to business as usual. I think that it will probably lead to the one world government, and the presidential candidates will probably start announcing as some respite or remedy moving into this one world economy, one world government, in order to just sustain on a global level what this fear tactic, which I believe. But very quickly, thank you for that opportunity.
Great.
And also, I just wanted to remind each person of the natural means that we have to stay healthy in our minds, so that we're not giving in to any fear tactics that are programmed. Also in the body, remember garlic, ginger.
Great.
Remember, right?
Thank you,
turmeric.
Michelle. We just need to move on and see if there's any other comments.
Try to discourage people from taking the vaccines, because that will lead to further imprinting and programming. Even though there is no predictive programming, it's still in terms of, it's still a means of mass manipulation, also depopulation.
All right, Michelle.
Infecting people.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your comments. Much appreciated.
Thank you for
Anybody
allowing me
else?
to come.
Of course. Thank you. Anybody else?
Hamid,
Yes, Pancake.
Brother Pancake, I'm not going to be too long, but, being on the ground, I've been perusing various areas in the city, I'm getting a sense of, pockets of fear, anxiety, and uncertainty. We're looking at the effects of this pandemic in our community. Folks have lost their jobs, and and we're looking at it's not so much. I'm looking at some of the business have been boarded up because for fear of of being broken into or attacked or what have you. What's going out in our valleys, like Alhambra, with the gun shops, National Rifle Soldier, right? And the fear attacks of what may come. What we have to really be knowledgeable and be vigilant and be ready, for action, Hamid, because lives, like they say it originated in China, so they're targeted, so we have to really open up ourselves and, be aware of what's going on the ground. And most importantly, I'm going to just say this and I'm going to cut it. Let's stay connected.
Great.
less
Thank you. Thank you,
social.
Pancake.
Yes,
Thank you,
that's
Pancake.
what I want to say.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ray, you wanted to say something?
Yes, yes. By the way, my name is Ray, and I'd like to say greetings to everyone online. And I'd just like to add to the scenario is that right here, I feel as though this is a nucleus of a start of something that's real positive and shedding light to all the darkness. I just like to add, each one of us should share what Stop LAPD Spying Coalition is doing and how to spread something like this across the United States. So people in their community can observe these councilmen and these policemen. The same framework that has started here should be just spread out. We won't have to worry about no new world order or what's going to happen with the other people who maneuvering these fingers behind our back. We just push them out. We just share this information, this knowledge base, because if the universe is nothing but mental, all of us getting together on the same mental plane, we can dispel anything.
Great.
I like
Thank you.
Unmute.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Ray. So as we close this first part, because this is also supposed to be a working meeting as well, I just want to circle back with Jamie. So Jamie, now reflecting back, you know, any closing thoughts on this particular journey?
I think my only closing thought is really just amazed at the culture of resistance that we have now, and that we've always had, but that, you know, when words like algorithms and data analytics, you know, all these fancy science terms get thrown at people, I think one of the things that I feel better about and prepared for and ready is that time that we took as a community to really break down what these quote unquote sciences were. And this has prepared us for our next journey into looking at LAPD's data-informed policing. And I think that piece we really need to honor and to see inside of us, that it's giving us the endurance that we need and the information that we need and the community that we need to continue this fight.
Excellent, excellent. Tiff, any thoughts, closing thoughts on this one?
No, I think everybody here has really summed it up very well. I like something that you said, Hamid, in the beginning, and that is, you know, it's a great demonstration of what we can achieve when we fight, you know, and that, it has been, we talk about the fight and the struggle of it, and it isn't always easy. But yeah, it's just a great example of that. And I thank you all again for just kind of all the learning and the opportunities and the opportunities to kind of build together on this.
So a couple questions before we close this out, you know, are that, and somebody had asked that they can't stay long if there's going to be a recording. Yes, this will be a recording and uploaded on our website at stoplapdspying.org. And then also, then there's one about, can the algorithmic ecology chart be shared with participants? Absolutely. It's going to be, what we can do is we can post it, and it's also available on the website as well, with the whole write-up and an explanation of the, and I think Leah has already posted that. Mike, I'll come to you. And then Aziz has this, that do you have a sense of what the state of play is in other cities regarding popular campaigns against predictive policing in the United States? You know, as a result, Aziz, that what we can do is like a quick scan. And yes, people are fully understanding, they're learning. People have been organizing. We've been sharing a lot of our strategies as well. But as we shift, you know, they keep on coming back. We know up in Canada, they're definitely moving a bunch of stuff in British Columbia, in Vancouver. I know there was a big fight in Chicago. There's continuing to be other fights in other cities as well. New York keeps on shifting its stance on predictive policing. So I think the question is that how are we staying current, and how are we staying very much on the train as the train keeps on moving. So we'll continue with this conversation, but what I want to do now is to pivot and to really move into, and now folks, you will have at least virtual sampling that how boring we can get as well, because digging into work, now the real work begins. Because as we dismantle one piece, the LAPD has come out with this data-driven handbook, the data-driven community-informed policing handbook. So then the question is that as they come out, we're already on to them. We've already just started looking at it. So I'm going to pass it on to Jamie, who would just be like, then Jamie, if you can walk us through that and just what is our assignment?
Cool. Thank you, Hamid, and thanks for that session. I think that was really helped prepare us for getting ready for this
just getting
this kind of next bite where we want to go next. So I'm excited. I'm used to being in meetings where I can move a lot, I can walk around. We break off into working groups. We read articles together. We do a lot of things together. So this is a new way to figure out how to accomplish the same thing, which is knowledge sharing with each other, which is building with each other, which is exposing things, which is learning to understand things and research and celebrating. So we're going to try, to make that happen virtually. And as we move along, because I'm looking forward to this 4th meeting of the month being a continuation of this fight, looking for new ways to engage, virtually until we're able to be together again, which I really look forward to. So as Hamid was talking about, we had a campaign that started in 2016 to dismantle what LAPD at that time was calling predictive policing. They had Predpol and Operation Laser, and effectively both of those programs have been dismantled. Predpol was being run by an algorithm. Laser used a combination of person and place-based programs, or tactics, I should say. And the person-based tactic used a risk assessment, and the place-based tactic used ArcGIS. So that was dismantled. And in July of 2019, as a response to the Office of Inspector General's audit that was released in March of 2019, which was a result of the public hearings and all of our organizing, LAPD started to talk about a handbook that they were going to come out with, right? And they were calling the new kind of programming that they wanted to implement data-informed community-focused policing. So, so today we are here to basically discuss what that is. That report, or that handbook, got released on 4/20, and we want to share with you what's in that handbook. We want to recruit you to help us unpack that handbook down to the very, very last drop in that handbook. We want to, and that's kind of the culture that we established when we were going after Predpol and Laser, is that, everyday folks just basically started to pick up a book, Google things, talk to other people to figure out exactly how this programming was operating. Coming from the coalition, we were very clear that we were abolitionists. We were very clear that the intent was to cause harm in these programs, but to dismantle them, we needed to know them so that we could almost physically touch them and break them, is what I'd like to say. Because with everything they build brick by brick, it can be taken down and it can be dismantled. So, so this is part of the recruitment, right? So we want to let you know what's going on, and we want to invite you into this fight. We want to see what you can bring to the table, who you are, what you do, what interests you, how can this help your community? Part of, I think the continuing narrative around this is realizing that science was being used as a cover for violent and racist policing, right? And that became very apparent in the whole journey that we had with Laser and Predpol. I think what we see in this handbook now, and this is kind of the only way I was struggling with it today in how to describe what this handbook truly is in honoring our power in this fight, but it's really LAPD's pathetic attempt to legitimize themselves. And I say that because, you know, during these hearings and during these several police commission meetings that we were at, you could see Michael Moore sitting there and pleading and, you know, telling us why they're legitimate, why they need to be in society. And I think that was a very powerful moment at that time, because here you have the chief of police, you know, pleading his case for why he's legitimate. And that's exactly what exposing and putting into light the kind of programming they were using and the obvious racism that was inherent in the programming did. It shook LAPD. So their only way to respond was to say, okay, we're gonna come out with something new. And like I said, this data-informed community-focused policing handbook is really that pathetic attempt to legitimize themselves. This handbook is nothing more than the compilation of a lot of old tactics, but then also you see that the structures of surveillance expanding, right? And there's two basic premises in this book that I think are very important, and the small team that has just started and committed themselves to digging into this program is going to kind of go over what some of these components are. But they basically fall into two categories. What they're calling neighborhood policing, which many people know, have known prior as community policing. And then your basic crime and disorder, which we've, you know, have time and time again have heard from former chiefs of police like Bratton, have coined through broken windows policing this attempt to create some kind of order that is again just a cover for racism and violence. So we're gonna take some time right now to break that down. There's gonna be different voices, because I love different voices, because we all bring something different to this fight. And then we're going to kind of go into a kind of a Q&A and just a discussion with everybody to kind of talk about, you know, what more questions, maybe what more do we want to know, because in reality, this handbook discloses very little. It still doesn't talk about the different relationships and partnerships that LAPD has with academic institutions that are creating algorithms. It doesn't talk about data sharing. It doesn't talk about the different avenues that they're collecting data. So there's a lot still for us to unpack. But so I'm gonna stop right now and kind of open it up to the team, and we're gonna start to break down a little bit of what this handbook is talking about. So I'm gonna pass back to Hamid. I'm gonna ping pong back to you, Hamid. And Hamid, can you talk a little bit about the different components of neighborhood policing? We see them talking a little bit about Elucid, this kind of survey tool they're using now for sentiment metrics, right? We see them talking about the community safety partnerships. So can you give us just a little bit of overview of not only what are they doing, but what is our counter narrative to that as well?
Right. So I think one of the things when they talk about community focused is exactly what they are trying to project, that they're into the community. But I think for us, it's really crucial that a couple things to start on that point, that you were talking about the crisis of legitimacy almost, Jamie, where from our vantage point, you know, we don't even give them any legitimacy. So there is no crisis. It's just a matter that it's not just a temporary lack of confidence in them. We want to abolish this system. So, you know, we want to dismantle this. But now they're kind of circling back. And I think the best way for the way the coalition looks at this very community-oriented policing and community policing, and the way the programs that they bring in, one is, of course, they're talking about this technology-based, and you were talking about getting a sentiment matrix. So the question is that when they talk about the sentiment matrix, whose are they even reaching out to? Which community are they, does even have access to it? You know, we're based out of Skid Row. Well, how many folks even have access to this kind of technology to take these surveys? What do those surveys mean? How do those surveys reflect? What is the question? So I think that they are trying to kind of now put a veneer on, let me just.
And yeah, I'm having a hard time hearing you, Hamid.
Yeah, somebody, let me just put a mute all and see if we can. Yeah, there's some, let me just see. Let me just do this real quick. Okay. So I think the key here is that they, in a sense, have been kind of pushing this very snake oil kind of just technologies and all of that. A key element that they're pushing is these community safety partnerships, which started off with in 2011. That's a history where LAPD started building this quote unquote relationship with community members, particularly in Jordan Downs, in housing projects, in Jordan Downs, in Nickerson Garden, in Ramona Gardens. And that is the idea is to foster a relationship with the community. Well, you know, and so that is very much when you start looking at it through the lens of an occupying army, this is a tactic that occupying armies use as counterinsurgency. I mean, counterinsurgency is a concept which actually where predictive policing is rooted in. That's what the algorithm started off its origins into the battlefronts of Iraq and Afghanistan. But it's very much a practice of policing. And a whole lot of stuff has been written about law enforcement in the United States and its relationship to counterinsurgency. Because the tactics that they use are very much that they reach out to some leaders in the community. So think of right now the occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan, reaching out to tribal chiefs, right? They reach out to nonprofits. They reach out to heads of churches and places of faith-based places. And they try to create this little core group of their relationship, through which then they try to get their controlling messages into the community. And this is something that an occupying army uses constantly, you know, in a way, counterinsurgency, that how can we prevent and how do we create legitimacy about our presence as an occupying army as well. So that always is something that we need to be very carefully looking at, that where this handbook is going. And I think I would end by saying that when you even think of these community safety partnerships, you know, there's a whole history behind that too, that when you look at the trajectory post 2011, and so LAPD, and I remember at one point we were keeping a tab every year that 2012, 2013, 2015, 2016, 2017, LAPD murdered the most people of any police department in the country. And almost this was a time where every 7 hours and 52 minutes, somebody was being killed by law enforcement agencies around the country, and LAPD was leading the charge. So the message behind these community safety partnerships is that either you give the key to your house, or we're going to use violent tactics to keep you suppressed. There is no in between. There's nothing. And I don't want to go into this whole piece that why don't they have community safety partnerships in Pacific Palisades, or why don't they have in Beverly Hills and all of that. You know, that's because they don't, because they work for them. You know, they're the protectors of property, so they work for they're on the dole from this is a very class-based, you know, settler colonial system. So I think I would end by saying that we have to be very, 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 we have to look at it through a very critical lens, because this is as close to a military occupation tactic as it comes when they talk about community-focused policing.
Thank you, Hamid. And I think one of the things that is a little bit interesting in this whole kind of neighborhood policing, community policing tactics they're using is this elucid survey. They basically enter into your phone through small games like Candy Crush and Farmland and these games that people play online. And once you open the survey, a GPS signal goes back and forth between the people that are collecting the data. They ping you several times to make sure you're from that area. And then essentially what LAPD ends up getting is a map of who does not like the police and who likes the police. And at one point in the handbook, they say, well, if they don't like us, then we show up more. So that's something to think about, you know, continual mapping of who we are, how we feel, what's going on with us. So I wanted to move next into talking a little bit about data analytics and the centers that are being built. I'm going to ask Tiff, who was a researcher and one of the key organizers in the fight to dismantle the Operation Laser. And she's going to they're going to talk a little bit about the community safety operations centers and these new area centers that they're opening up that do a lot of data analytics and data crunching, data sharing, almost like what the coalition would call mini fusion centers in our neighborhoods now. So Tip, can you tell us a little bit more about what you found in the handbook, and maybe even expand a little bit on the narrative that Chief Moore and that LAPD writes about the successes of the CSOC, because I think that's very telling as well.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Jamie. Okay, so I'll start by talking about what a CSOC is, and then we will talk about what this new structure is, which is APC-IC. That's the area level kind of information center. But we'll start out with what a CSOC is, and some folks here may be familiar with that already because that was an element of LAPD's Operation Laser and Predpol. They did roll out their first CSOC in 2016. And what a CSOC is, and again, that stands for Community Safety Operations Center, is this is like an information and surveillance hub, or like a spy center is what the coalition calls it, for the LAPD divisions in that bureau. It is a command center. It's fully staffed with officers and crime analysts 24 hours a day. There's rows of computers and monitors. There's a large screen overhead that is constantly showing updated information. They stream surveillance directly from communities, from CCTVs, constantly updating with heat maps of the city. And this is going on 24 hours a day. So this is a center, an information hub is what LAPD calls it. We call it a spy center. Just taking in information, sucking in information. And then what they do there is, as Jamie said, they crunch that information. Some of the information gets disseminated immediately out to LAPD captains in the field, and other information is used to generate mission sheets and mission bulletins. And these mission sheets then go out to LAPD, sometimes special units, sometimes gang units, metro cops. These mission sheets are something that will be targeting not only areas and places and kind of assigning that specific unit or patrol with a mission in that area, but they can also be centered on specific people and directing them to surveil or stop certain people. Okay, let's see. So that is what CSOC was doing in 2015 and what they are currently doing now. They started with one in 2016. They started with one. And then today they have one in each of the 4 bureaus. And regarding the impact of CSOC, to hear LAPD talk about it, what we hear is that CSOCs have been successful in increasing community safety and in decreasing violent crime. But not only does LAPD's own data and analysis refute that and actually show that there haven't been any changes in violent crime after the CSOC was established, but if we look at the LAPD murders and the murder of Black and brown youth by LAPD officers specifically, what we see is a sharp increase in 2016 in the number of Black and brown youth that were killed by police. And just to give some context behind that, LAPD, of course, does have a history of targeting Black and brown youth. And historically, between 0 and 2 of the people killed by police or LAPD every year are Black and brown youth between the ages of 14 and 18. So typically it's about 0 to 2 per year, which is a horrible statistic to have to say. But in 2016, between February and October, LAPD shot and killed 6 youth between the ages of 14 and 18 that were Black or brown. So it's Jesse Romero, Jose Juan Mendez, Daniel Perez, Richard Risher, Carnell Snell, and Kenny Watkins. 3 of those youth were killed in divisions where CSOC had been established, and one of them was definitively killed by an officer who was assigned to CSOC. And we're raising this to say that when LAPD reports that CSOCs will be continued because they have been successful in reducing violent crime, that we are going to react very strongly and viscerally to that statement, and we will refute that, and we're going to challenge it, because historically we have seen what CSOCs can mean for community and how it takes the lives of community members and specifically the lives of LA Black and brown youth. So that's a little bit about what the CSOCs are. So again, those are going to continue. And then the new piece that we're hearing about more in the handbook and being talked about for the first time are the ACCICs. So the ACCICs, these are area crime and community intelligence centers, and there's going to be 21 of these because there's going to be one in each of LAPD's areas or divisions. And what we know about these so far is that, like the CSOCs, these are going to be LAPD hubs of information for each area. So similarly, again, they're going to be taking in a lot of crime data and surveillance that is being gathered from the local community, and then they're going to be using that information to generate missions and heat maps more locally. In addition to this, it's the ACCIC team, the staff that's working there at the center, that are going to look at that information for the area, and they are going to be tasked with selecting kind of areas for police occupation and for like heightened police surveillance and police occupation. And these are going to be labeled NEAs, lots of acronyms today, NEAs, which are neighborhood engagement areas. So for folks familiar with Operation Laser, I mean, to me, I read about this and I thought laser zone, but what they're calling them are neighborhood engagement areas. But these are supposed to be kind of small areas that LAPD is kind of pinpointing and saying, okay, this is a place that we see a need to, we want to decrease the violent crime in this area. We want to increase community safety. So we're going to start by implementing a program around this area specifically, or this NEA specifically, and we're going to start tracking what's going on there, and we're going to start monitoring it, and then we're going to see how successful we are. And I won't talk too much longer about that, but essentially some of the examples that are given in the handbook regarding like suggestions that might be made in that area would be like implementing more patrols, implementing more surveillance in that area, adding more lights, targeting specific people. So there's lots of ways that LAPD is looking at, or kind of lots of different strategies that they're looking at, kind of targeting specific areas and kind of labeling it as neighborhood engagement, when in fact, of course, it is this old LAPD tactic of like containing, controlling, occupying, taking over, and none of this truly is done with the community in mind or with any input from the community. So yeah, so that's about CSOCs and about ACCICs.
Thanks, Tiff. I think something to think about as well in reading about the neighborhood engagement areas is that a couple things come up, right? So they talk about, you know, these officers that go, they surveil, they start looking at the area. Is it dark? Is there drug activity going on? Is there prostitution? But it sounds very familiar to broken windows policing. Are there people sleeping there? Is there someone urinating? What's going on, right? And so I think when we start looking at the lens of what the officers are going to be, how the officers are going to be criminalizing that space, many people start thinking about, oh, this is broken windows policing, right? And so what do they do in broken windows policing is they want to go, you know, kind of get people out of there, move them along, and they want to fix the window, right? And fixing the window for LAPD doesn't mean some kind of benevolent thing that they're going to come and, you know, help you, you know, fix your house, that they're going to be these, you know, benevolent gatekeepers. But what it is technically that they're using is crime prevention through environmental design. That means that they are creating spaces in the community and CPTED, and that's like their acronym. There's so many acronyms, you know, alphabet soup. This is a very old tactic, but when we think about, you know, and that's really important for us to know, because when we think about how the police are engaging in our communities, we have to be able to know what it is. Oh, we know this. This has been from the 90s, from the 60s, from the 70s. We know this tactic. This isn't new. This is the same thing. So whatever you're trying to do to say that you are making this, you know, engagement more, you know, have more procedural justice, it's the same thing and it never did work. So one thing I want to give as an example to what crime prevention through environmental design is when we think about LA Live, I've been in conversations, Hamid has spoken about this often, but it was essentially designed to be able to kettle people. So if there was ever anything that happened, they could easily contain and control and criminalize people. So we have to also think about how our environments are changing to make people easier to see, easier to police, easier to contain. So thanks so much for that, Tiff. That was really thorough and just really informative. So I wanted to pass it next to Sophie to talk a little bit about location-based policing, right? The Predpol's done, but now we're still back into that same discussion around hotspots, micro spots, you know, of sending officers. So can you tell us what the handbook is saying about location-based policing? Someone unmute Sophie. Thank you.
And there we go. All right, thanks. Yeah, and I definitely want to also recognize that like all of these things are connected, right? So like location-based policing connected to all of these maps, connected to basically deeming specific neighborhoods, specific areas as places where police are more likely to be deployed, also as areas where crime is more likely to occur. As the coalition always says, right, crime is a social construct, so who is determining what that crime is? And that also is a big part of when we think about what the LAPD is doing moving forward with using crime data to generate different hotspot maps. So in this report, well, I guess to back up a little bit, so we've talked several times about how Predpol was dismantled recently, but it's very clear from this report that LAPD is not stepping back from any kind of algorithmically mediated hotspot policing. I think there are a couple of parts in the section around acquiring data and data analysis and the just general data-informed community-focused policing section. Of course, they've chosen this name instead of precision policing because they don't want it to be something that we can easily target, right? It's hard to say, oh, we're gonna take down data-informed community-focused policing. But we don't wanna let that stop us, of course. So some of the things that they say in the report are that they want to focus on solving crime problems in specific places. And in the past with Predpol, they often use this kind of rhetoric of, well, Predpol, especially in comparison to person-based policing, it can't be racist, like it's totally fine because we're just policing places, right? We're policing locations, but you're not policing like a tree or something, right? You're policing the people who are in those locations. And as we know, LA already historically has been redlined, has been segregated. So locations are inherently political. The way that the city is already split up is inherently racist. So if you're going to be policing locations, then you're going to be doing racist policing, which of course is kind of redundant, right? So one of the things that comes up in this is this idea of different analytical tools that they're using. So with Predpol, we had a very clear target because Predpol Inc., the company, made this algorithm called Predpol, which the police were using for their location-based policing. Now, Predpol doesn't come up at all in this report, which is already suspicious, right? Because this report came out the day before they announced that Predpol is dismantled, and they've been working on this report for a long time. So why isn't Predpol in this report? There's also, I think, at the end of this, I'm also going to get to, I'll just talk about it now. A lot of what we wanted in this guidebook isn't here, and we didn't even want this guidebook to begin with, right? We wanted Predpol dismantled, and this was their like mea culpa or whatever to the community. But they originally had said that the guidebook was going to be a guidebook on how predictive policing works for the LAPD. But instead, as Jamie was saying, it's basically this like bullshit like public relations kind of handbook and guidebook. And so there is just a lot of specific vagaries, I guess. So they say to analyze the data that they're going to be collecting from these different areas and consolidating at these different centers like the CSOCs, they're going to be using the crime analysis mapping software, which they have said that they've been using consistently over the past decade, and then also existing off-the-shelf software like Stata or SPSS and their data platform platforms, ArcGIS and Palantir. But of course, like the way that the LAPD is using it is not going to be strictly off the shelf, but they don't really name who's going to be involved in that, what the kind of software that they're going to be using is going to be doing, the specific kinds of data that they're going to be collecting. Actually, in fact, in the areas around data collection for this location-based policing, they are very careful to put in several spaces, like not limited to, when they list like ways that they're going to collect data. I think there's one section where they say they list like the type of data that's collected is going to be like the type of crime, the MO, the time, the location, and any other necessary elements, right? So that kind of makes it so that they're not accountable to anything in this guidebook. I also want to make sure that we're thinking about who is going to be within the LAPD or contracted outside of the LAPD is going to be paid to be making this software, because they're not using Predpol anymore. So what are they using? If they're going to be developing somewhere some kind of software, like internally or externally. And then they also say that they're going to be leveraging new mapping and crime databases. So I don't know, it sounds like that might be something different than just the consolidation centers we've been talking about so far. So who's going to be making these new mapping and crime databases? What are they going to look like? What are they going to be using them for? And I think they just mentioned that and then don't go any further in talking about it. So there's a lot of things that they're putting into this report that seem like filler, but also give us places to begin looking for potential targets. Yeah, anything else to add, Jamie?
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks. And I think, you know, what's really interesting about that is that they said this was a handbook for the officers. So having all this information left out of it, how does any officer know anything about what they're doing? Which we often found is that LAPD officers had no clue what was going on. Excuse me, what was going on. And excuse me. And in the chronic offender bulletins, we even saw that they were randomly just placing people on lists. So again, you know, you see this pseudoscience and you see it as a cover for them to target whoever they want to, target whatever communities they want to. And even in the Predpol mapping, we were able to recover from a public records request that the Predpol program itself can be edited. So the boxes aren't necessarily generated just by the algorithm. They don't go, you know, strictly by the algorithm. There's a crime analyst who picks what box they want to send an officer to. And even what we saw in Skid Row with how Predpol was being used is that they actually quarantined Skid Row with hotspots, so that officers were literally driving around Skid Row like a circle, like a perimeter, saying, you know, do not cross here, because if you do, we know who you are, and you know, you don't belong here. So, so I think, thank you, Sophie, for raising that. There's a lot of questions that we have now as to who are the new contractors, and that definitely needs to be brought to light, because these are the people that we also need to hold accountable. These are the people that we publicly need to put out there for community members to know, just like we publicly shamed and made Jeff Brantingham a household enemy for everybody to know who he is, right? So in talking about the chronic offenders, I wanted to shift to Shakir to kind of tell us a little bit about, you know, the chronic offender program that LAPD was using in Operation Laser, but the offender base component that they looks like they reformed a little bit, but are claiming is still very necessary as a form of tactic that they use on the community.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. So yeah, the piece I'm going to talk about, so one of the components of this whole new guidebook or vision or whatever you call it is the term they use is offender-based policing. And that's basically, it looks to be kind of a repackaging of chronic offenders. You know, the name is not even that changed. And the basic idea is the same, and they kind of keep referring to repeat offenders as this category of people who they're targeting. So just like with chronic offender, the goal, I think, is to keep kind of stalking, harassing, and punishing the same people who they've already always been targeting. And this is happening in a really direct and systematic way, because what they're saying they're going to do is basically identify everyone who's on parole, probation, and community supervision. So that's kind of everyone who has previously been arrested or convicted or processed through the system, and then target those people for more surveillance. This is kind of a pattern of how the stalker state and the police state always grows is that, you know, police are out there arresting thousands of people every day, processing them, caging them, putting them through this machinery. And then the information that police are collecting about those people and the kind of the categories that people are being put in through all of that process is then used to target all of those people again, and to target their families, to target their neighbors, to target their communities, for continued surveillance and continued policing. So it's this kind of really direct feedback loop of, we identify, we're going to go and target people, and then those are the people who are now the offenders who we need to keep doing offender-based policing for. And, you know, along the lines that we've been talking about with some of these other programs, so even though this is kind of an individual-based, person-based policing, they're saying, they're very clear that they're going to be also making this location-based. And so it's not just, so they're targeting individuals, but then also in areas that they define, perhaps working through CSOCs and some of these other programs, they're going to be, you know, throwing more police in places where, based on this kind of mapping of who's on parole, who's on probation, all of that stuff. They give an example of, okay, if the LAPD has heard about some kind of surge of motor vehicle thefts, then they give this example, then they can start targeting people who live in that area based on the information they have from those categories of who lives there and who's there. What we know, though, is obviously this is just going to be a kind of cover, or all this is going to do is they're just going to be going after the same neighborhoods that they've always wanted to target and oppress. And in fact, we know they've historically been making a lot of arrests in those areas, doing a lot of policing in those areas. And so this is now just their entry point to keep doubling down on that, using this kind of concept of hotspots and both individuals and places that they say are kind of driving crime. Part of it, they kind of, in the guidebook, they cite, there's some like footnotes about research that they say is showing that doing this kind of targeted supervision of surveillance of people who were arrested before helps to reduce what they call recidivism. We haven't dove really deeply into this, but I just looked up those footnotes real quick, and none of what they're saying is, none of the links say what they're actually, what they're saying. They're just kind of making it up to justify the program. And the reality is, you know, the more policing and surveillance you're throwing at someone who is coming out of prison, who's trying to get back on their feet, the more likely, obviously, you are to arrest that person again. It's not a question of, you know, Sophie just said, you know, crime is obviously not a real thing. It's defined by what police are saying and what police are choosing to arrest people for. And it's common sense that if you are kind of monitoring and harassing and going after the same people, you're going to end up arresting them again. And that's kind of what recidivism, this whole concept of recidivism, it just is. It's not like, oh, someone who, you know, committed a crime is committing another crime. It's that someone who was targeted for arrest one time is now going to be targeted for that kind of arrest again. And then, yeah, just to kind of wrap up on this system, I mean, you know, these systems we always talk about are always the tip of policing's knife, and the way that works here is that they're the systems that police are using to justify and kind of paper over their choices about which people, which places, what they want to do, and where they want to go and unleash their violence. The rest of the entire violent infrastructure behind it is the same. This is just like the face of it that's helping them decide, or helping them cover up for where they're trying to go, who they're trying to go after.
Yeah, thanks, Shakir. And I think that kind of, just one last point I wanted to raise of another tactic, and I think that helps to segue into this, is, you know, thinking about, you know, this other, right? There are those who are dangerous that we have to track, and there are those that are true community members that want to, you know, that feel obligated to do what we say. And you'll see that language in the handbook, you know, those who you know, feel obligated to follow the law, feel obligated to do what police say. And this is a concept, right? A concept that was developed, I believe, in the 90s. We're still doing our research about that, but for those of you who are familiar with it, it's called collective efficacy. And it basically says that there are certain people that exist in the community who feel drawn to each other and willing to help each other, like call the police if there's someone suspicious in the neighborhood, like call the police if their neighbor looks suspicious, like call the police, right? So that is collective efficacy, right? But they clearly delineate who has collective efficacy and what in the past have they uncovered through different studies. On Justice, Security, and Strategies did a study in Miami, and basically saying that people who own homes, who are older, who are not on general relief, tend to be more inclined to protect their neighborhood and be involved in their neighborhood, right? So we see this immediately as war on the poor, right? If you are a renter, if you're on general relief, if you are young, then you are not seen as somebody who wants to look out for your neighbor. You're not seen as somebody who is a part of a community. And that's very problematic because it sets up the whole stage right there for the counterinsurgency, for creating the us and the them, so that you have those who are with the police and those who are not with the police. And these are the people who will fill out the surveys. These are the people who will call the police. These are the people who will participate in the football games with police. And these are the kinds of people, and when we think about them, definitely more well-off, richer people, probably whiter people, who want to go along with how police operate, right? So, so that's pretty much what we know at this point. And we've only been able to skim through it a couple times. There's a lot for us to still kind of dig into, you know, what is the origins of collective efficacy? Who are the academics that are behind this? Do we need to expose them? What is crime prevention through environmental design? Who are the, you know, who are the different academics involved in that? Where else is it playing out? How can we dismantle that? How can we stop them from doing that? We think about all our public housing folks and why there's no trees, why they've made the landscape easy for people to be policed. So, so that's kind of what we wanted to break down for folks. And I wanted to now open it up for comments, for questions, but also, one of our first goals is not only to write a response, you know, a quick response to Moore and to LAPD in regards to the handbook and its, and you know, what it's saying, which is obviously them saying that, you know, legitimizing themselves, saying they're the reason for driving down crime, and, you know, saying that they're there to build relationships, when we clearly know that this is all about the intent to cause harm. So we definitely want to respond to them very clearly that you have never in the 150 years that you've existed ever developed trust or respect for community members. So let's get that first and foremost. Second, what we'd like to do is draft a new PRA, because as you can see from what Sophie, Ray, Shakir, and Tiff, and everybody else who just spoke, there's a lot of questions we still have. And this is the light that we're going to shine on them. This is how we're going to move to expose them. And we have a history of doing it. We have models to do it. So, so I'm going to stop right there and just see if folks have any comments, questions, or, you know, direction. What else should we know? So
PRA is a public records request.
Yeah, public records request. So if, yeah, folks have questions, if Hamid and Shakir, you can help out.
Mike's, yeah, Mike just raised his. Mike, you trying to unmute yourself, or? Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, I'll make this really quick. I'm Mike Eade. I'm an immigration attorney in San Francisco. I practiced criminal law for a few years in New York. I was going through the that data-informed community-focused policing thing that you showed, and I noticed on page 47, in the very bottom right, in that section discussing the ACCIC, they mentioned Palantir and LexisNexis. I can tell you that recently, in an immigration context, LexisNexis has come under fire for selling data to ICE, which ICE then uses to apprehend people. And there is a woman named Sarah Lambden, who is at the City University of New York School of Law, where I went. She's written extensively about this, and I can post some links in the chat. I would be happy to contact her to see if she knows anything about Lexis doing something similar, but in a criminal context. Also, and as a former public defender, I am somewhat hesitant to say this, but based on some lectures that I've watched online, some articles that I've read recently, it does seem like that public defenders in general, very generally, are realizing that they need to be more radical and that they need to listen to what community groups are saying. So I'm wondering if it would be worthwhile just to reach out to the PD's office and say, hey, do you know about this? Do you know about these programs? Are they coming up in cases? Blah, blah, blah. You know, there might be one person in that office who is willing to share information. And, you know, it's one more source of information, you know, in terms of what the LAPD is doing. I also, if you will allow me, I can make a quick update on some information that I've been trying to get up here in San Francisco in terms of the whole COVID thing, or I can just post it in the chat. It's just a quick overview.
Yeah, if you don't mind posting it,
Okay.
Mike. And so, yeah, definitely that would help.
Okay.
But just to your public defender comment, so we actually did a presentation for the National Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys.
Ah, okay.
And there were also a whole bunch of public defenders that came as well. It was Jamie and myself, and I believe someone else. And quite frankly, you know, to your point exactly, people had no clue that what this data-driven police was going. I mean, it was wild. And you know, these are the folks who are out there. And even I remember that in the broader criminal defense attorney field as well, when the coalition first launched, people had no clue. It's reminded me of the '96 laws about the retroactivity. I mean, you're an immigration attorney, about like people getting deported.
Yeah.
Even with green cards, because something was in the past and they were making plea deals. So I think there's a whole lot of education. So we would love to absolutely get into that community and do some more community education.
Okay.
Thank you for raising that.
And most definitely, I'm sure you have stoplapdspying@gmail.com.
Yes.
You have our email, and just would love to connect more about LexisNexis. And
okay, great.
This is an excellent example of the dirt you dig up that they're hoping you're not seeing because they're putting it at the bottom of a page. And so this is definitely more fuel for us to go after them, because this is inherently the stalker state. And that's what's so disturbing about seeing these smaller area fusion centers that are existing in our neighborhoods that are very, very close to homes, close to people. And that, you know, not only are they mapping us, not only are they selling our data, but then, you know, someone like ICE comes in and has access to this stuff, they, you know, completely in one area that is very easy to obtain and very easy to get access to somebody. So yeah, so thank you so much, Mike, for that.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions, comments, or direction for us to take in filing our public records request, or even going after what kind of tactic to go after this whole handbook? Or is anything like this happening in your city or your locality if you are not from here and you'd like to share?
We are here to recruit you. Come on.
This is where that interaction starts to happen. So, so what our next step is, and what we're kind of, you know, what I was talking about, what we want to formulate is another public records request. And just so that folks know a little history around how we write our public records request, is that when we drafted our May 2017 public records request, it was very much in a setting that was probably even more intimate than this setting, where there was a group of about, you know, 10 or 12 of us meeting at LA Can. And this is back in the day where LA Can Freedom Room hadn't been completely established. And we were sitting around just like this, and we said, hey, what do we want to know? What do we want to know? And we were right there just typing it out. What do we want to know? And I really kind of encourage folks to, you know, ask these, you know, these questions that come up, because that public records request was the catalyst that moved, you know, a lot of the work around laser to be dismantled. But what's so great about it is that we weren't having this huge dependency on lawyers to do it. It was actually community members saying, you know, I don't know this. I want to know more about this. You know, here's how I know how to say it. And of course, we had to learn a little bit of language on how to draft a PRA, and we had folks that were lawyers that were willing to help us, but the key questions were generated from the community. When we received, finally, after we filed the lawsuit and they started to dump the documents, all those documents were gone through by us. We didn't hire a lawyer to go through them all. We didn't need somebody to, you know, figure it out for us. It was all done by community grassroots power. And so, so again, you know, this was a model that we created that we want to keep replicating because it puts the power in the people. Our, you know, and when we finally filed the public records request, we didn't, you know, I'm sorry, when we finally filed the lawsuit, that's when the lawyers got engaged, you know, because they had to literally go file the lawsuit for us. But all the letters and that went back and forth between the city attorney and ourselves were pretty much drafted by us. Our lawyer just kind of formatted it and sends it on its way. So I really want to, you know, just kind of express and to encourage us to realize that those things we can do. We don't need other people mediating that for us.
Yeah, I think it's also the purpose for that too, which goes back into how we started this conversation about building a culture of resistance, because unlike the typical mainstream legal field, us filing for public records are not for a discovery for a particular issue or a case. We file for public records for storytelling. And storytelling to organize, storytelling to bring this awareness in the community, storytelling to do this community education and outreach. So how does the community get engaged? And we are also in conversations with other cities around the country as well, that how public records can be weaponized. And it's like a very simple process. It's a very canned kind of a language, and you just ask them. And that has been really a tremendous piece. And I think each one of us should be trained, or just at least to know, because we really don't need lawyers.
So,
any comments, questions?
Yeah, does anybody have a comment?
So, yes, Michelle, go ahead. Let me just, hold on, Michelle. I think we need to unmute you. So go ahead and unmute yourself, Michelle. Go ahead.
Okay, no, I mean, this handbook sounds like a real snowdrop. You know, it's like a way to cover up all of the specific kinds of activities and data collection that's going on. And you know, I mean, there might be documents behind it, but it looks like you're going to have to get at the actual activities of the officers. You know, what are they actually doing in the specific areas in order to really figure out what their systems are. I mean, because this is just like a public relations. No, it reminds me of Michael Moore and who he is. You know, he presents a nice face, but he's underneath. There's all this other stuff that's going on. So, I mean, I think it's probably a way of getting at stop LAPD spying. You know, it's like, okay, so we're not going to say what we're doing. You know, we're going to hide it from you.
I know. Spite us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. So
yeah,
there's a comment from Hiba. How have your experience been with request FERPA for surveillance data records? Hiba, can you explain that a little bit more? I know you're on mute, so let me try to, if you're open to speaking.
Yeah.
You're unmuted.
Hi,
Please
can
go
you hear
ahead.
me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just I'm from Chicago, and so in the past we've requested data through FERPA. Is if when data is collected from, and I might be like saying this wrong, so when data is collected from like a state body or a state body, so for example in our case many years ago we were requesting a history of ticketing data from the police. We were able to request what's called FERPA to get that data from the police records, because we wanted to show that in certain areas of the city there was more tickets happening than others, kind of going back to Chicago's history with segregation and redlining. So I just wanted to ask about, because I'm very interested in your group's research and what you all do. So just wondering about if you all had used FERPA and if that was relevant to the city of LA and your own kind of data collecting approach.
Mm-hmm. So,
Right.
so I'm actually gonna, I'm just gonna say something for a minute, but then I'm gonna bring in Tiff. If Tiff, are you still with us? Yeah, I see your phone there, and see if maybe you want to kind of jump in here as well. But so the coalition, at least in this fight against predictive policing, we didn't necessarily request data. At one point, we did want to request data on field interview cards or stop cards. Because we wanted to see, what the racial breakdown was, because it was a component of a risk assessment for chronic offenders in the laser program that's now dismantled. And they did direct us into filing a public records request to actually make it happen. At one point, an officer did say they would just give me the data, but I think they got corrected, because the next time I checked in with them to see if they would just give it to me, they said I had to file a public records request to receive it. But I was wondering, Tiff, if you could talk a little bit about the open data porthole that we've done a lot, or that you have done a lot of analysis on stops, arrests, non-categorical use of force, and speak to a little bit to what that is. And then, yeah, if you could, please, or if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, I can do that. And I'm sorry, I didn't actually, I didn't hear all of the question, or I think I probably didn't understand or have enough information to understand the question. But I can speak to the open data portal that they have here in Los Angeles. And I forget what it's called, but usually I have to just Google like LA open data, and they have it's a city website. I think that's what you're referring to, Jamie, right? It's like the LA City website. Yeah, okay. Where they very proudly say, hey, look at how great we are at making all of our data readily available. And they have lots of information there. It's definitely worth looking if folks haven't taken a look there already, because they have just tons of information on all kinds of aspects of city life. And but something that I've been using the portal for is looking up. There's lots of things to do with LAPD there. So there's lots of information there to do with arrests, to do with who gets stopped, and crime data. So there is a lot of information on there already. And I'm sorry, again, I'm not sure what the original question was, but that's something, that's a source of information that exists here in Los Angeles.
No, that's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and we're also currently, and I know that there's the coalition, along with the National Lawyers Guild, last week filed an extensive public records on COVID enforcement as well with the LAPD. So just want to know that what tactics they're using. But in the meantime, we have been pulling down the arrest and the stop data as well to see, because they've been talking about cite and release, and not to detaining people and not to arrest them, given the conditions in the detention centers and in the jails as well. So that whole process also helps in trying to understand what the landscape looks like. We are in the process, and of course, a couple things that came up were where they were stopping folks, particularly around sex work. That came up. There were also still some quality of life, like broken windows type policing, that came up around open container and urinating in public. So definitely, Hiba, to your point, this is, but I think this is a debate that the coalition we continue to have, that at what point do we, because we also come from a data abolitionist perspective as well, because data is so political and data gets weaponized all the time. So how do we not encourage and depend on data? So it's sort of like it's a tension that we have, that on one hand the data does inform, but yet at the same time it's the same data that is used to criminalize. So what is the best just option that we have, and we're building with that. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, there's a new message down there. Oh, thank you. Okay, of course, you're very welcome. Okay, so
if I can just finish.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Quick comment. Thanks.
Yeah.
I know folks, some folks shared, some folks maybe not so much, but now's the time for the ask. And this is how we get things started, right? We're going to get it started in here, people.
Oh my gosh, watch it. It's a one-way ticket to the coalition.
Who wants to help us start writing this public records request? And this is how we do it. We all, you know, are here. Some of us sign up, we raise our hands, and then we start having the plethora of meetings that we love to have in the coalition. This is the way we come together. Hamid has said that he's going to start a delivery service so he can bring us all goat to our different houses as payment for our work. Just kidding. He's not on Grubhub, so don't try to find him. Yeah, so I'm just interested. Who wants to be a thought partner? Doesn't mean you have to write, just means that being in the room with your perspective, with your knowledge, with who you are, is everything that we need to make this happen, right? So don't sit back and think, oh, well, I'm not a lawyer, I don't write well, which is my common thing. I'm always like, I don't write well. We just need your mind, and we need your motivation, and we need your desire to dismantle this program and to keep this abolitionist fight going. So if anybody's interested, we're doing a lot on Zoom now, so things are, you know, only accessible to certain folks, but we definitely would love to bring you on and to get your input. So if you would like to help out, if you feel comfortable, drop your email in the chat or do a private message to Shakir or Hamid, and they can add your email, like, you know, give it to the group so that we can get you looped in. Or if you want to, just send an email to stoplapdspying@gmail.com, and then we'll reach out to you and we'll connect with you to get you looped in and find a good time for all of us to meet and start figuring out what we need to know and how to weaponize these public records requests so that we can ultimately dismantle this handbook. I can dismantle the handbook, but so we can take down this program.
Great, and I know Stephen Raganold has offered their email address, so that'd be great. That'd be great. Thank you. So, folks, that's you know, that was it for today. I mean, I know that this is something that you know, we'd love to do it in person, but the goal for having these webinars and these meetings were that we're not going to let them disrupt us. We're not going to let them neutralize us. We're not going to let them slow us down. Because it's a matter of just chatting up, talking to each other, building that power, doing this knowledge exchange, be a thought partner, be an action partner, be a strategic partner, and that's what we are trying to build over here. So our next thing is going to be on the first Tuesday of next month, which would be next Tuesday, May 5th. That's going to be, again, a play again on the intersection of police state, gender, and sexuality in the time of COVID. Our very own Chella Coleman is a part of that conversation. We usually invite other folks as well. We're trying to invite Trevor Ellison, who's a professor and on gender and sexuality, and has written quite extensively as a Black radical scholar on these issues, had been organizing in LA as well. So keep an eye out. And let's keep the fight in, and any which way, if we can support your work in your city, in your town, we're happy to do that. Right now, we're in conversations with folks in Cleveland and some other places as well. And thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you all, and be safe and be healthy. And this is going to be uploaded on the website as a recording. So thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.